Hey everyone! Tonight we're going to examine a question that's been deliberately avoided by mainstream archaeology for over a century. What if the Sumerian tablets aren't describing gods at all? What if they're documenting actual history? What if the Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans existed as we know ourselves today? And what if the clay tablets pressed 4,000 years ago preserve the last written testimony of that impossible age? Before we begin this journey into the deepest layers of ancient memory, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if these explorations genuinely resonate with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your world. I love knowing we're all scattered across the planet, separated by oceans and time zones, yet connected by the same questions about what truly came before us. Now settle in, get comfortable, dim the lights if you haven't already. Maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background sound. And let's ease into tonight's investigation together. We're going to read the Sumerian tablets not as mythology, not as religious allegory, but as historical documentation. We're going to take them at their word. And when we do, when we stop filtering their testimony through our assumptions about what's possible, a very different picture emerges. A picture of Earth before humans, a picture of the Anunnaki as actual rulers, a picture that's been hiding in plain sight for 4,000 years, waiting for us to finally see it. The story begins not with interpretation, but with translation, with the actual words the Sumerians wrote, with what the tablets say when you read them directly, without the comfortable buffer of scholarly dismissal that turns everything strange into metaphor and everything impossible into myth. In the basement archives of the British Museum, stored in drawers that slide out with the whisper of metal on metal, rest thousands of clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia. Most are small, no larger than your hand. Their surfaces are covered with wedge-shaped impressions, cuneiform script pressed into soft clay over 4,000 years ago, then baked hard by sun or fire. Each tablet is a window, a glimpse into minds that existed before Rome, before Greece, before anything we typically associate with Western civilization. Among these tablets is one that changed everything when it was finally translated in the early 20th century. It's catalogued simply a reference number that means nothing to anyone except the handful of Assyriologists who work with Sumerian materials. But its content is extraordinary. It's called the Eridu Genesis, and it contains the oldest known account of human creation. Not the oldest surviving account, the oldest account period, written down around 1700 BCE, but preserving traditions that scholars acknowledge must be far, far older. The text begins not with humans, but with a time before humans, a period when Earth existed, but humanity did not, when cities stood, but were inhabited by others, when civilization flourished under rulers who were not human in the way we understand that term. The Anunnaki, the text names them explicitly, describes their world, details their governance, and only then, only after establishing this pre-human context, does it describe the creation of humans and why that creation became necessary. This is not how creation myths typically work. Most cultures begin with chaos or void, then describe gods creating the world and humanity simultaneously. Earth and humans emerge together as paired aspects of the same creative act. The biblical Genesis follows this pattern. God creates Earth, then creates humans to inhabit it, all within the same six-day sequence. Egyptian creation myths have the gods emerging from primordial waters and immediately creating humans to worship them. Greek myths have humans fashioned by Prometheus shortly after the Titans established cosmic order. But the Eridu Genesis is different. It describes Earth already formed, cities already built, civilization already functioning, and then, only then, As a later development, as a response to specific circumstances, humans are created, not as the purpose of creation, not as the intended inhabitants of Earth, but as a solution to a problem. As servants created to perform labor that others no longer wish to perform. This structure, this sequence, appears throughout Sumerian literature. It's not unique to the Eridu Genesis. The Atrahasis epic, another major Sumerian text preserved in multiple copies from different periods and locations, follows the same pattern. The world exists. The Anunnaki inhabit it. They govern cities, manage agriculture, maintain infrastructure. And only after this system breaks down, after the Anunnaki workers rebel against their labor, are humans created to replace them. The repetition of this sequence across multiple independent texts suggests it's not literary invention. It's preserved tradition, oral history that was eventually written down. And the tradition insists on a specific chronological order. First came the Anunnaki, then came their civilization, then came their cities, and only then, only after all of this was already established, did humans enter the picture. What does it mean to read this as history rather than mythology? It means taking seriously the possibility that the Anunnaki were actual beings who actually ruled Earth during an actual period before humans existed in our current form. It means acknowledging that the tablets might be preserving genuine historical memory, however fragmented and mythologized by time, of a period when Earth's dominant civilization was not human. This is uncomfortable. It violates everything we think we know about human origins, about the archaeological record, about the timeline of civilization's development. It suggests that current humanity might not be Earth's first attempt at civilization, that something came before us. Something the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, something that ruled, built, governed, and developed sophisticated culture before we existed to witness it. But here's what makes this possibility worth examining seriously. The Sumerian tablets are incredibly specific about the pre-human period. They're not vague, they're not symbolic. They provide details, names, locations, sequences of events, descriptions of governance structures, explanations of why humans were eventually created. The level of specificity suggests documentary intention rather than imaginative storytelling. Consider how the Atrahasis epic describes the pre-human world. It opens with a clear statement. When the gods, instead of man, did the work, bore the loads, the gods' load was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. This immediately establishes that gods, the Anunnaki, were performing physical labor. They were digging irrigation canals. They were maintaining agricultural systems. They were building infrastructure. They were doing the actual work of maintaining civilization. For how long? The text states, for 40 years they bore the excess, for 40 years they bore the work, night and day. Some versions say 3,600 years, one full Sar cycle in Sumerian chronology. Regardless of which number we accept, the text clearly indicates that this pre-human period lasted for an extended duration. This wasn't a brief moment before human creation. It was a lengthy epoch, a civilization that operated for generations, possibly thousands of years, before humans entered the picture. Who were these laborers? The text calls them the Igigi, a class of younger gods subordinate to the great Anunnaki. They performed the physical work necessary to maintain the agricultural and infrastructural systems that supported Anunnaki civilization. They dug canals, they cleared irrigation channels, they maintained dikes, they planted and harvested. They built and repaired, all the labor that civilization requires, but they grew weary. The text describes their exhaustion, their resentment, their growing anger at being forced to perform endless labor while the great Anunnaki, the ruling class, lived in comfort. Finally, the Igigi rebelled. They burned their tools. They surrounded the house of Enlil, the supreme ruler. They demanded relief from their labor. This is a workers' revolt, a labor uprising. And it's described in remarkably concrete terms. The Igigi aren't abstractly dissatisfied with cosmic injustice. They're specifically exhausted from digging canals and maintaining irrigation systems. Their revolt isn't symbolic, it's practical. They refuse to work any longer under current conditions. The great Anunnaki convened to address the crisis. What could be done? The Igigi had to be appeased, but the work still needed to be performed. Civilization couldn't function without someone maintaining the agricultural and infrastructural systems. Enlil proposed harsh punishment for the rebel leaders, but Enki, the god of wisdom, offered a different solution. Why not create a new class of workers? Beings specifically designed for labor. Beings who would work without complaint, without rebellion, without demanding relief. Why not create humans? The assembly agreed. And so began the process documented in multiple Sumerian texts with remarkable specificity. The goddess Ninhursag, also called Nintu or Mami in different texts, took on the role of creating these new workers. But she didn't work alone. She collaborated with Enki, who provided the technical knowledge. Together they fashioned the first humans. The description of this creation process is where the texts become most intriguing, because they don't describe divine magic or instantaneous manifestation. They describe a procedure, a process with specific steps, specific materials, specific methods. It sounds less like religious poetry and more like technical documentation. According to the Atrahasis epic, the process required specific components. First, clay from the Apsu, the freshwater ocean that the Sumerians believed existed beneath Earth's surface. This clay represented raw material, physical substance. Second, blood from a slain god. The text names him Wi-Ilu, also called Geshtu-i in some versions, meaning one who has intelligence. This god was killed in the assembly of the great Anunnaki, and his blood was collected. Why blood from a god, specifically described as having intelligence? Because that blood contains something essential. The text calls it Temu, a Sumerian word meaning intelligence, consciousness, understanding, or spirit. This divine essence, mixed with the clay, would transform inert matter into conscious beings. Without it, the clay would remain lifeless. With it, humans would possess awareness, thought, the ability to understand instructions and perform complex labor. The mixing process is described with procedural detail. Ninhursag took the clay and the divine blood. She kneaded them together, mixing thoroughly until combined. She spoke incantations over the mixture, words of power that activated or sanctified the process. Then she divided the mixture, creating not one prototype, but multiple. 7 pieces that would become males, 7 pieces that would become females. 14 initial humans, establishing a breeding population from the start. But here's where it gets even stranger. The text describes these mixtures being placed into something the translation renders as wombs, but the original Sumerian suggests might be vessels or containers. Birth goddesses, 14 of them, each took one portion of the clay blood mixture. Each carried it for a specific gestation period. 9 months, matching normal human pregnancy. And at the end of that period, the first humans emerged. This sounds like artificial gestation. Like the clay blood mixture wasn't simply shaped and brought to life instantly, but rather was placed into some kind of developmental process, carried for months before producing viable humans. The text emphasizes that this process was replicable, that it followed specific procedures, that it could be repeated to produce more workers as needed. The procedural specificity is remarkable. This doesn't read like, "and the gods spoke and humans appeared." It reads like, First we gathered materials, then we combined them in specific proportions, then we processed the mixture following these steps, then we gestated the result for this duration, then we produced viable workers. The language is systematic, methodical, as though documenting a repeatable process rather than describing a unique miracle. When scholars read this, they immediately interpret it as metaphor. Obviously, they say, this is primitive people trying to explain human origins using the only concepts available to them. The clay represents earth. The divine blood represents life force or spirit. The mixing and gestation are poetic ways of describing natural birth. The whole thing is allegory for how humans emerged naturally, dressed up in mythological language. But what if we resist that automatic interpretation? What if we read it as the Sumerians wrote it, as documentation of an actual process? Then the text is describing something that looks remarkably like genetic engineering or artificial creation, combining physical material, clay, or whatever substance that represents, with something containing consciousness or cognitive capability, blood, or whatever that symbolizes. Processing the combination through specific procedures. Gestating the result in artificial or surrogate vessels, producing new beings that possess both physical bodies and conscious minds. The Sumerians couldn't have possessed modern biotechnology, so this can't be what the text describes, right? That's the assumption that makes us interpret everything as metaphor. But what if the Anunnaki, whoever they were, did possess knowledge we lack? What if they understood biology, inheritance, development in ways we're only beginning to rediscover? What if the Sumerians were attempting to document, using the only vocabulary available to them, a process they'd witnessed or been told about but couldn't fully understand? Consider how someone from an ancient culture would describe modern genetics if they somehow witnessed it. They'd lack words for DNA, proteins, cells, genes. They'd need to use familiar metaphors. Maybe they'd call it mixing essences. Maybe they'd describe it as combining earth with spirit. Maybe they'd use language about blood and clay because those were the closest analogies they had for physical matter and life force. But underneath the metaphorical language, they'd be attempting to preserve genuine information about an actual process. This is one way to read the Sumerian creation texts. Not as pure mythology, but as documentary attempts using limited vocabulary to preserve information about something real. Something the Anunnaki actually did. The creation of humans through some process that combined physical material with consciousness-enabling factors, resulting in beings specifically designed for labor. And this brings us to the most uncomfortable implication of reading these texts as history. It means humans were created as a servant species. We weren't created as the pinnacle of divine purpose. We weren't fashioned in the image of the gods for fellowship. We were made to work, to dig canals, to maintain agriculture, to relieve the Anunnaki of labor they found burdensome. The texts are explicit about this. In the Atrahasis epic, when Enki proposes creating humans, he states the purpose clearly. Let them bear the yoke of the gods. Let man assume the drudgery of God. When humans are successfully created, the reaction is relief. The gods were freed from their toil. Man was created to bear the yoke. The work that the gods had borne was placed on man. This isn't hidden subtext. This isn't reading between the lines. This is what the tablets openly state. Humans exist to work. That's our purpose. That's why we were created, to serve as laborers for those who ruled earth before us. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that draws on older Sumerian traditions, the same purpose appears. After Marduk defeats Tiamat and creates the world, he proposes creating humans. Blood I will mass and cause bones to be. I will establish a savage man, shall be his name. Verily, savage man I will create. He shall be charged with the service of the gods that they might be at ease. Service of the gods, so that they might be at ease. Humans created specifically to work so that the Anunnaki wouldn't have to. Every major Sumerian and Akkadian text that mentions human creation repeats this purpose. We are workers, servants, laborers. That's our designed function. If we read this as mythology, we interpret it symbolically. Humans have responsibilities to the divine. We're meant to serve higher purposes. Our labor has spiritual significance, all comfortable, abstract interpretations that don't challenge our self-image. But if we read this as history, if the Anunnaki were actual rulers who actually created humans for actual labor, then we're forced to confront an uncomfortable possibility: that humans as a species were deliberately designed by previous Earth inhabitants to serve as a workforce. That we're not natural evolution's pinnacle, but artificial creation's intended servants. That our intelligence, our dexterity, our social cooperation, all the traits that make humans capable of complex civilization, might have been deliberately selected or engineered for because those traits make us excellent workers. This possibility becomes even more intriguing when you look at how unusual humans are compared to other Earth species. We're the only species that can perform the kind of complex, sustained, cooperative labor that civilization requires. We're the only species that can follow complex instructions, use sophisticated tools, work in coordinated groups toward long-term goals, maintain infrastructure across generations. Evolutionary biology explains this through natural selection acting on our ancestors over millions of years. Intelligence evolved because it provided survival advantages. Tool use evolved because it helped us compete. Social cooperation evolved because group living provided protection. All standard evolutionary explanations. But here's what's strange. The evolutionary explanations don't quite account for the degree of human cognitive capability. We're far more intelligent than survival strictly requires. We can do abstract mathematics, compose symphonies, write poetry, contemplate infinity. None of these capabilities provide obvious survival advantages in the ancestral environment where our brains evolved. They're massive overkill for hunting, gathering, avoiding predators, and reproducing. Some evolutionary theorists have proposed that human intelligence evolved through sexual selection rather than survival selection. We got smarter because intelligence was attractive to potential mates, not because it helped us survive. But this pushes the question back one level. Why would intelligence be attractive? What survival advantage did intelligent mates provide that would make their offspring more successful? The Sumerian texts offer a different explanation entirely. Human intelligence wasn't shaped by millions of years of natural selection. It was designed. Created deliberately by the Anunnaki, who needed workers capable of understanding complex instructions, using tools effectively, cooperating in large groups, maintaining long-term projects. Our cognitive abilities are precisely calibrated for these purposes because we were made for these purposes. This makes humans unique, not because we evolved unique advantages, but because we were manufactured for unique functions. We're not Earth's natural apex predator who evolved intelligence for survival. We're Earth's first artificial species, created by previous inhabitants who needed laborers and designed us specifically for that role. Reading the tablets this way transforms everything. The creation accounts aren't mythology. They're documentation. The Anunnaki weren't gods. They were previous Earth rulers, possibly a different species or a different phase of human development, who possessed sufficient knowledge to create new beings through some process the Sumerians called mixing clay with divine blood, but which might have been something far more sophisticated. And if humans were created as workers for Anunnaki civilization, then the entire pre-human period takes on concrete reality. There was an Earth before humans. A planet inhabited by others. A civilization that functioned for thousands of years, possibly tens of thousands, before humans entered the picture. The Anunnaki ruled that world, built its cities, developed its agriculture, maintained its infrastructure, until they grew weary of the labor and decided to create a new species specifically designed to take over the work. This is what the tablets say. This is what they insist on. Text after text, city after city, century after century. The Anunnaki came first. They ruled Earth. Then they created humans, in that order, as history, not mythology. The question is whether we're finally ready to take them seriously, to read what they wrote instead of what we want them to have written, to consider the possibility that Earth had sophisticated inhabitants before humans existed, that we were created rather than evolved, that our purpose was defined by our creators rather than discovered through our own development. The tablets have been patient. 4,000 years they've waited, pressed into clay, preserved through catastrophes, surviving while everything around them collapsed. Waiting for someone to finally read them as documentation instead of dismissing them as mythology. Waiting for humanity to grow mature enough to consider the possibility that we might not be Earth's original civilization, that something, someone, came before us, that the Anunnaki were real, and that humans are what they created when they needed servants. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, consider what it would mean if the tablets are right, if we're living in a world that existed long before we did, walking on foundations laid by others, inheriting a planet we didn't discover but were brought into, children of creation, not products of evolution, servants who've forgotten we were made to serve, workers who've lost the memory of who created us and why. The Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans, according to Sumerian tablets. That's what they say. Explicitly, repeatedly, consistently. Maybe it's time we stopped explaining it away and started taking it seriously as the testimony it might actually be. But if humans were created as workers, created deliberately by the Anunnaki who ruled Earth before us, then where did the Anunnaki come from? The tablets answer this question too, and the answer is both more specific and more strange than most people realize. The Anunnaki, according to Sumerian texts, came from the sky. They descended. They arrived. They were not originally of Earth. This creates two possibilities, both of which appear in how scholars interpret the texts. The first possibility is that from the sky is metaphorical, meaning from the realm of the divine, from the sacred space that early cultures associated with the heavens. The second possibility is that from the sky is literal, meaning the Anunnaki actually arrived from elsewhere, from beyond Earth, making them extraterrestrial in the most direct sense. Most mainstream scholars firmly embrace the first interpretation. The Anunnaki are gods, and gods dwell in heaven, and heaven is the sky. So saying they came from the sky is simply mythological language for their divine nature. They didn't literally arrive from space. The Sumerians were describing spiritual origin using spatial metaphors. But here's what makes this interpretation problematic. The Sumerian texts distinguish very clearly between gods who were always of Earth and gods who came from elsewhere. They describe some deities as autochthonous, native to the land, emerging from Earth itself or from the waters that covered it. But they describe the Anunnaki differently. The Anunnaki descended. They lowered themselves. They came down from above. The Sumerian king list, that controversial document we examined earlier, begins with a statement that has puzzled scholars for decades. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu, descended from heaven, not emerged from earth, not developed among humans, but descended from a source above, from the sky, from heaven. Later, after describing the antediluvian kings and their impossibly long reigns, after narrating the flood, the text repeats the phrase, "After the flood swept over, When kingship was lowered from heaven again, kingship was in Kish. Again, uses the concept of descent. Kingship doesn't arise naturally, it's lowered, brought down, descended from somewhere above. The language is consistently vertical, from above to below, from sky to earth, from heaven to the terrestrial realm. This isn't the language typically used for gods who are simply associated with the sky as one of many domains. This is the language of arrival, of movement from one location to another, of beings who weren't originally here but came here from somewhere else. The Eridu Genesis makes this even more explicit. In its opening, before describing the creation of humans, it establishes the context. No city had been built, no sanctuary had been erected. All lands were sea. Then there was a movement in the midst of the sea. At that place, when Eridu was built, when the divine Prince Enki built the House of the Waters, he went from the cosmic ocean and came to the place where Eridu was founded. The text describes Enki, one of the chief Anunnaki, arriving at the location that would become Eridu. He came to that place. He didn't originate there. He arrived. From where? The text says, from the cosmic ocean, using Sumerian terminology for the primordial waters, but the description is of movement from elsewhere to Earth. Another text, the Enuma Elish, describes the origins of the gods in terms that sound remarkably like colonization or migration. The younger gods, including the Anunnaki, are born from primordial parents, but they then establish themselves in specific terrestrial locations. They claim territories, they build cities. They assign domains among themselves. The language describes settlement, the establishment of permanent presence in a place that wasn't originally theirs. If we read this as mythology, it's standard creation narrative. Gods emerge from chaos, establish order, assign themselves roles in maintaining the cosmos. But if we read it as history, however mythologized, it sounds like colonization, like a group arriving in a new land, establishing settlements, dividing territories, assigning administrative responsibilities. The Anunnaki in this reading would be colonists, settlers who came to Earth from elsewhere, established cities in Mesopotamia, developed agriculture in the river valleys, built civilization in a land that was previously uninhabited by their kind. And after establishing themselves, after their civilization functioned for thousands of years, they created humans to serve as workers. This interpretation aligns with how the tablets describe the sequence of events. First, the Anunnaki arrive and establish themselves. Second, they build cities and develop civilization. Third, they work the land themselves for thousands of years. Fourth, they grow weary of the labor. Fifth, they create humans to replace themselves as workers. It's a colonization narrative followed by a creation narrative. The two are sequential, not simultaneous. Where did the Anunnaki come from before arriving on Earth? The tablets are less clear on this, though some researchers have attempted to extract astronomical information from various texts. The most famous interpretation comes from Zecharia Sitchin, who argued that the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, with a long elliptical orbit that brings it close to Earth every 3,600 years. Sitchin's interpretation has been thoroughly debunked by actual Assyriologists, who point out that he mistranslated texts, invented etymologies, and imposed modern astronomical concepts onto ancient religious literature. Nibiru in actual Sumerian texts refers to Jupiter, or to a crossing point in the sky, not to a hypothetical distant planet. No serious scholar accepts Sitchin's translations or conclusions. But dismissing Sitchin's specific claims doesn't address the underlying question: what did the Sumerians mean when they said the Anunnaki descended from heaven? If we reject both the pure mythology interpretation that makes it entirely metaphorical and the Sitchin interpretation that makes it extraterrestrial in a specific way, we're left with a question that has no easy answer. One possibility that hasn't been seriously explored is that the descent from heaven describes not extraterrestrial arrival, but temporal arrival. That the Anunnaki came from an earlier time rather than from outer space. That they were Earth inhabitants from a previous age who survived some catastrophe that destroyed most of their civilization and then re-established themselves in Mesopotamia. This interpretation would make descent from heaven mean descent from an elevated or advanced state to a lesser one. The Anunnaki were once greater, more numerous, more powerful. Catastrophe reduced them. They descended from their former height to a diminished condition. And in that diminished state, they established the cities in Mesopotamia, ruled for thousands of years, eventually created humans, and finally faded or were absorbed into the human population they'd created. This reading maintains the historical reality of the Anunnaki while avoiding the extraterrestrial implications that make mainstream scholars uncomfortable. The Anunnaki would be previous Earth inhabitants, possibly survivors of an earlier human civilization, or possibly a different species native to Earth, who established the Mesopotamian culture that eventually evolved into Sumer. Another possibility is that descent from heaven is geographic rather than spatial. That it refers to descent from mountains or highlands to the river valleys of Mesopotamia. Ancient Near Eastern peoples often associated mountains with the divine. The Sumerians called their temple towers ziggurats, artificial mountains that reached toward the sky. Mountains were where heaven and earth met. If the Anunnaki came from mountainous regions, descending to the river plains to establish cities, then descent from heaven would be geographically accurate. They came down from elevated terrain, from the mountains associated with divine presence to the lower elevations of Mesopotamia. Over time, this geographic movement could have been mythologized into cosmic arrival, with the mountains becoming heaven and the descent becoming divine manifestation. This interpretation has some support in how the tablets describe the Anunnaki, bringing knowledge of agriculture, irrigation, and urban planning to Mesopotamia. These are technologies that developed elsewhere and were brought to the river valleys. If the Anunnaki were migrants from mountain regions where these technologies had already been developed, they would have appeared to lowland inhabitants as teachers bringing divine knowledge from the realm above. But none of these interpretations fully satisfy, because the tablets insist on something more than simple migration or survival from an earlier age. They insist that the Anunnaki possessed knowledge and capabilities that seem beyond what humans could achieve without help. They describe technologies, organizational abilities, and lifespans that don't match normal human capacities. They present the Anunnaki as fundamentally different from the humans who eventually surrounded and replaced them. The Sumerian king list's antediluvian reigns, measured in thousands of years, suggest beings who lived far longer than humans. The creation accounts describe the Anunnaki possessing knowledge of biology sufficient to create new species. The astronomical texts preserve observations requiring thousands of years to compile, suggesting institutional continuity beyond what human civilizations typically maintain. The architectural sophistication of the earliest Sumerian cities suggests engineering knowledge that appears without developmental stages. All of this points toward the Anunnaki being something other than ordinary humans migrating from elsewhere. Whether they were an earlier species, an advanced pre-flood civilization, or something else entirely, they possessed capabilities that set them apart from the humans they eventually created to serve them. And this brings us back to the uncomfortable core of the Sumerian testimony. If the tablets are historical documentation rather than mythology, then Earth was ruled by non-human or pre-human beings who deliberately created modern humans as a servant species. We're not evolution's natural development. We're artificial creation's intended product. We exist because the Anunnaki needed workers. This doesn't require accepting ancient astronaut theories or believing in extraterrestrial intervention. It only requires taking seriously the possibility that previous Earth inhabitants, whoever they were, possessed sufficient knowledge to modify existing hominids or create new ones through some process the Sumerians described as mixing clay with divine blood. Modern genetics has shown that human evolution includes some puzzling anomalies. Our chromosome count differs from other great apes in ways that suggest chromosomal fusion. Our cognitive abilities exceed what survival pressures would require. Our development shows sudden advances that are difficult to explain through gradual selection alone. While conventional evolutionary biology provides explanations for all of this, the explanations sometimes seem stretched, requiring us to accept that multiple unlikely events just happened to coincide in ways that produced uniquely capable beings. The Sumerian tablets offer a different explanation. Human uniqueness isn't the result of fortunate accidents or unlikely evolutionary developments. It's the result of deliberate creation by previous inhabitants who needed workers with specific capabilities: intelligence to follow complex instructions, dexterity to use tools effectively, social cooperation to work in large coordinated groups, physical endurance to perform sustained labor. If the Anunnaki deliberately created humans with these traits, either through genetic modification of existing hominids or through some other process the tablets describe in terms of clay and blood, then human uniqueness stops being mysteriously coincidental and starts being explicably intentional. We're unique because we were designed to be unique. We have the traits we have because those traits made us effective servants for the civilization that created us. This interpretation makes the Anunnaki responsible not just for ruling Earth before humans, but for humans existing at all. We are their creation, their product, their intended servants. And everything that followed, all of human civilization, all of our achievement, all of our history, flows from that initial act of creation when the Anunnaki decided they needed workers and fashioned us to fill that need. The tablets have preserved this testimony for 4,000 years. Mainstream scholarship has dismissed it as mythology for 150 years since cuneiform was deciphered. But the testimony remains consistent, detailed, specific. The Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans. They descended from heaven or arrived from elsewhere. They established cities and civilization. They worked the land for thousands of years. They grew weary. They created humans to replace themselves as workers. And humans, initially servants, eventually inherited the Earth when the Anunnaki faded, died, or departed. This is what the tablets say, explicitly, repeatedly, across multiple texts from multiple cities over hundreds of years. It's the foundational narrative of Sumerian civilization, and if we take it seriously, if we read it as history rather than dismissing it as mythology, then everything we think we know about human origins requires reconsideration. Were we created? By whom? For what purpose? And what happened to our creators? These aren't questions mainstream archaeology wants to address, but they're questions the Sumerian tablets insist on. Questions that have been waiting for 4,000 years for humanity to grow mature enough to consider them seriously. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, consider the possibility that the tablets are right, that humans were created by previous Earth rulers, that we're a designed species, not an evolved one, that our purpose was defined by our creators, and that everything we've built, everything we've achieved, everything we call human civilization is the unexpected flowering of beings who were meant to be servants but who inherited the world when those they were meant to serve disappeared. The Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans, according to Sumerian tablets. That's the testimony. Clear, consistent, detailed. Maybe it's time we stopped dismissing it and started seriously investigating whether it might actually be true. If the Anunnaki created humans to serve as workers, and if this creation happened while the Anunnaki still ruled Earth, then we should be able to find some evidence of this pre-human Anunnaki civilization in the archaeological record. We should find cities without human remains, architecture that predates anatomically modern humans, agricultural systems established before human farmers, some physical proof that Earth was inhabited and civilized before humans existed in our current form. The problem is that mainstream archaeology doesn't look for this evidence because it doesn't fit the accepted timeline. Human civilization is understood to begin around 10,000 BCE with the agricultural revolution. Before that, humans existed as hunter-gatherers who left stone tools and occasional cave art, but no cities, no architecture, no agriculture. And before anatomically modern humans, around 300,000 years ago, were earlier hominids like Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, who had even less cultural complexity. This timeline doesn't allow for pre-human civilization. If the Anunnaki created humans, as the tablets claim, that creation must have happened very recently in geological terms, probably within the last 100,000 years, when anatomically modern humans emerged. But archaeological evidence shows no advanced civilization existing anywhere on Earth during that period that could have created humans. Or does it? Recently, several archaeological discoveries have challenged the comfortable timeline. These discoveries don't prove pre-human civilization, but they create uncomfortable questions about what existed before the period we typically call the beginning of civilization. The first challenge comes from sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which we've mentioned before, but which deserves closer examination in this context. The site consists of massive stone pillars arranged in circular formations, carved with intricate animal reliefs, requiring coordinated labor from hundreds of workers. It dates to 9600 BCE, making it over 11,000 years old. This predates agriculture, predates pottery, predates everything we associate with the necessary foundations for civilization. Who built Göbekli Tepe? The conventional answer is hunter-gatherers, people who still lived in mobile groups without permanent settlements, without domesticated crops or animals, without the social complexity that should be required for monumental architecture. But this answer creates problems. How did mobile hunter-gatherers organize and sustain the labor force needed to quarry, transport, and erect 16-ton pillars? How did they feed hundreds of workers for the years this construction would have required? How did they develop the artistic skill evident in the carvings? Most problematically, Göbekli Tepe isn't the only such site. Similar constructions have been found across the region, all dating to roughly the same period. This suggests not isolated anomalies, but a widespread culture capable of monumental architecture at a time when such capability supposedly didn't exist. Conventional archaeology handles this by adjusting assumptions. Apparently, hunter-gatherers were more capable than previously thought. Apparently, monumental architecture doesn't require the social complexity we assumed. Apparently, the transition to agriculture was motivated by the need to support the ritual centers, like Göbekli Tepe, rather than the other way around. But there's another possibility. What if Göbekli Tepe wasn't built by the ancestors of modern human civilization at all? What if it was built by a previous civilization, one that existed before the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe around 10,800 BCE destroyed most evidence of what came before? What if these sites are remnants of the Anunnaki civilization the tablets describe, survivors of a much larger cultural complex that was largely destroyed? This interpretation would explain why Göbekli Tepe appears Fully formed without developmental stages, it wouldn't be the first monument of its kind, it would be one of the last, built by survivors of a civilization that was already collapsing. The sophistication wouldn't need to be explained as unlikely hunter-gatherer achievement. It would be expected as the product of an already mature culture. And it would explain why Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. The site wasn't abandoned naturally. Someone carefully filled in the structures with rubble, preserving them but making them inaccessible. Why would hunter-gatherers, who supposedly struggled to build the site, expend enormous additional labor to bury it? Unless they weren't the builders. Unless they were later inhabitants who encountered these ruins, found them sacred or disturbing, and buried them deliberately. The same pattern appears at other sites. Sophisticated construction appearing without clear precursors, flourishing for a period, then being abandoned or deliberately buried, as though these sites represent the last remnants of something that mostly disappeared, leaving only fragments that later human cultures encountered and couldn't fully understand. The second challenge to conventional chronology comes from dating anomalies. At several sites, excavation has revealed construction at depths that don't match the dates they should have. The deepest levels at some Mesopotamian sites show sophisticated engineering that predates when the site supposedly began. Foundations requiring advanced mathematical knowledge appear at strata dated to periods when such knowledge supposedly didn't exist. Conventional archaeology handles these anomalies through redating. The sophisticated levels must be younger than they appear. The dates must be wrong, the chronology must be adjusted, but the anomalies keep appearing, site after site, suggesting that the problem isn't dating errors, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the timeline. If the Anunnaki established cities in Mesopotamia thousands of years before humans reached that region, if they built sophisticated structures during the antediluvian period the king list describes, then we'd expect to find exactly these kinds of anomalies. Deep foundations showing engineering knowledge that appears too early, construction techniques that seem too advanced for their supposed dates, architectural sophistication at levels that predate when human civilization supposedly began. The flood deposits provide a chronological marker, the sterile clay layers that Leonard Woolley found at Ur and that appear at other Mesopotamian sites date to around 2900 BCE. Everything above the flood layer is clearly human, clearly Sumerian, dating from that catastrophe forward. But what about below the flood layer? Conventional archaeology assumes the levels below the flood deposits represent earlier human occupation, Proto-Sumerian or Ubaid cultures that were developing toward eventual civilization. But if the Sumerian testimony is accurate, those deepest levels below the flood deposits shouldn't be early human occupation. They should be late Anunnaki occupation, the final phases of a civilization that existed for thousands of years before catastrophe destroyed it. This interpretation transforms the archaeology completely. The sophisticated construction at deep levels wouldn't need to be explained as surprising early human achievement. It would be expected late Anunnaki civilization. The architectural knowledge wouldn't need to be explained as knowledge that developed quickly. It would be knowledge that had been refined across thousands of years before the flood buried it. And it would mean that Sumerian civilization didn't begin around 3500 BCE. It continued around that date, rebuilding on the ruins of what came before, inheriting fragments of Anunnaki knowledge, carrying forward what could be salvaged from the catastrophe. The third challenge comes from mythological traditions that are too consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other. Multiple civilizations, separated by oceans and thousands of miles, preserved traditions of teachers who came from elsewhere, established civilization, and then departed or were destroyed by catastrophe. The Sumerians describe the Anunnaki, The Egyptians described the Neteru, the Mesoamericans described the plumed serpent, the Hindu tradition describes the Devas. The list continues across cultures worldwide. Conventional anthropology explains these parallels through universal human psychology or ancient trade routes that transmitted myths across distances. But the consistency is remarkable. Not just that multiple cultures have teacher myths, but that the teachers are consistently described as coming from elsewhere, bringing knowledge humans didn't previously possess, establishing civilization, and then departing. This consistency makes more sense if the myths preserve genuine historical memory, if there actually were previous Earth inhabitants who established early cultures, taught skills to developing human populations, and eventually disappeared when catastrophe or other factors ended their presence. Different cultures would preserve this memory in different forms, adapted to local languages and theological frameworks, but the core narrative would remain consistent because it referred to actual events. The Sumerian version might be the most detailed because Sumer possessed writing early enough to record the traditions before they degraded through oral transmission alone. But the fact that similar traditions appear globally suggests the event being remembered wasn't local to Mesopotamia. It was widespread. Previous Earth inhabitants who interacted with developing human populations across multiple continents, teaching civilization's foundations before disappearing. This brings us to the most challenging question. What happened to the Anunnaki? If they ruled Earth before humans and created humans as workers, why aren't they still ruling? Where did they go? Why did they disappear? The Sumerian tablets provide an answer, though it's scattered across multiple texts and requires careful synthesis. The Anunnaki didn't disappear suddenly, they faded gradually, and the primary cause was interbreeding with the humans they'd created. Multiple texts describe Anunnaki gods taking human partners. The goddess Inanna has human lovers. The god Dumuzi is described ambiguously, sometimes as fully divine, sometimes as partly human. The king list itself describes several early post-flood kings as sons of divine parents and human mothers, creating hybrid bloodlines that were part Anunnaki, part human. Genesis preserves a parallel tradition. Chapter 6 describes the sons of God taking daughters of men as wives and producing offspring called Nephilim, giants or heroes of old. The text presents this as problematic, as violating some boundary that should have been maintained. But it records that the practice occurred and produced hybrid offspring. If the Anunnaki intermarried with humans over many generations, their distinct genetic identity would be diluted. Each generation would contain less Anunnaki heritage and more human heritage. Eventually, after hundreds or thousands of years of interbreeding, the Anunnaki wouldn't exist as a distinct population. They would be absorbed into humanity, their genetic heritage distributed throughout the human population, but no longer concentrated enough to produce beings with full Anunnaki characteristics. This would explain the gradual disappearance. The Anunnaki didn't leave. They didn't die out from catastrophe alone. They were genetically absorbed through interbreeding with the far more numerous human population. By the time Sumerian civilization proper appeared around 3500 BCE, the Anunnaki as a distinct group no longer existed. Only hybrid descendants remained, carrying some Anunnaki heritage, but predominantly human. The Sumerian royal lines claimed divine ancestry for exactly this reason. They weren't purely human. They carried Anunnaki bloodlines inherited from the rulers who had created humanity thousands of years before. This gave them legitimacy to rule, marked them as closer to the divine, distinguished them from common humans who lacked that heritage. If this is what actually happened, if the Anunnaki gradually disappeared through interbreeding rather than through sudden departure, then traces of their genetics should exist within modern human populations. And in fact, modern genetic research has found exactly such anomalies. Humans carry genetic material that doesn't trace to any known ancestral population. Small percentages of DNA that appear in modern humans without clear source populations. The standard explanation is that these represent archaic human groups like Neanderthals and Denisovans who interbred with modern humans and contributed genetic material before going extinct as distinct populations. But what if some of this unattributed genetic material doesn't come from archaic humans? What if it comes from the Anunnaki, previous Earth inhabitants who interbred with humans after creating them? The genetic traces would look similar, ancient DNA from a population that no longer exists as a distinct group, but that contributed to modern human genetics through interbreeding. Testing this hypothesis would be difficult because we don't have pure Anunnaki remains to compare against. We don't know what genetic markers would distinguish Anunnaki from humans or archaic humans, but the principle is sound. If the Anunnaki existed and interbred with humans, genetic traces should remain, distributed unevenly across human populations, depending on which groups had more contact with Anunnaki remnants. Some researchers have noted that certain human populations, particularly those from the Middle East, where Sumerian civilization developed, show genetic markers that don't trace clearly to known ancestral populations. The markers appear to represent mixing with some unknown group. The standard explanation is that they represent unknown archaic humans who lived in the region. But they could also represent Anunnaki heritage, genetic contribution from the creators mixing with their creation. This is speculative, and no mainstream geneticist would accept it without substantial additional evidence. But the possibility exists that modern humans carry genetic heritage from the Anunnaki who created us, remnants of their contribution distributed through populations as they gradually interbred and were absorbed into humanity. If this is true, if the Anunnaki disappeared through gradual genetic absorption, then they didn't really disappear at all. They became us. Modern humans are the hybrid descendants of Anunnaki creators and their human creations, carrying genetic and cultural heritage from both sources. This would explain why Sumerian culture shows such reverence for the Anunnaki, while simultaneously showing them fading from direct rule. The Sumerians weren't worshipping distant, departed gods. They were honoring ancestors who were partially their own progenitors, whose genetic and cultural legacy they carried forward. It would explain why kingship descended from heaven after the flood, not because literal gods came down, but because royal lineages carried higher concentrations of Anunnaki genetics, making them the legitimate inheritors of rulership that the Anunnaki had previously held. And it would explain the gradual transition from the Anunnaki period to the human period without requiring catastrophic intervention or mass departure. The Anunnaki didn't leave. They interbred, generation after generation, until the distinction between Anunnaki and human became meaningless. What remained was a hybrid population carrying both heritages, ruling Earth as inheritors of the civilization the Anunnaki had established. The tablets document this transition, though modern readers interpret it as mythology about gods departing or retiring to heaven. But readers' history, the texts describe gradual replacement. The Anunnaki reduce in power and presence. Humans increase in numbers and importance. Mixed bloodlines appear. Eventually, purely human dynasties rule, though claiming divine ancestry to legitimate themselves. By the time Sumer proper begins, around 3500 BCE, the transition is complete. The Anunnaki exist only in memory, myth, and genetics. They're no longer present as a distinct group. Their civilization has been inherited by the hybrid descendants who became the Sumerians. And those descendants preserved the memory of their creators through religious tradition, mythologized over time, but retaining core historical information that the Anunnaki ruled before humans and that humans were created to serve them. This is the narrative the tablets preserve. The Anunnaki came from somewhere, possibly earlier in time, possibly from elsewhere geographically. They established civilization in Mesopotamia. They ruled for thousands of years. They created humans as workers. They gradually interbred with their creation. They were absorbed genetically and replaced politically. Their culture was inherited by hybrid descendants. And their memory was preserved in texts that documented them as gods, but that might actually have been documenting previous rulers whose advanced civilization has been largely forgotten. None of this is proven. None of this is accepted by mainstream archaeology or anthropology or genetics. But all of it is consistent with what the Sumerian tablets actually say when you read them as historical documentation rather than dismissing them as mythology. The question isn't whether we can prove the tablets are historically accurate. The question is whether we're willing to take them seriously enough to investigate whether they might be, to look for evidence of pre-human civilization, to examine genetic anomalies that don't fit standard human evolution, to reconsider archaeological anomalies that conventional chronology can't explain, to ask whether previous Earth inhabitants might have created modern humans and then gradually been absorbed into the population they created. The tablets have been waiting for 4,000 years for someone to ask these questions seriously. They've preserved the testimony through the rise and fall of empires, through the death of languages, through catastrophes that destroyed everything except clay pressed with wedge-shaped marks. They've waited patiently while we developed sufficient technology to test their claims, sufficient genetics to trace their implications, sufficient archaeology to excavate their evidence. Maybe now, finally, we're ready to stop dismissing their testimony and start investigating whether it might actually be true. Whether the Anunnaki really did rule Earth before humans. Whether humans really were created as servants. Whether the gradual transition from Anunnaki rule to human rule really did happen through interbreeding and genetic absorption. Whether modern humans really are the hybrid descendants of creators and creation, carrying both heritages forward into a future neither pure Anunnaki nor pure human original stock could have anticipated. The tablets say yes, explicitly, repeatedly, consistently. They've been saying yes for 4,000 years. Maybe it's time we listened. The most profound thing about reading the Sumerian tablets as historical documentation rather than mythology is how it transforms our understanding of human purpose. If we evolved naturally through millions of years of selection pressure, then we have no inherent purpose except survival and reproduction. We're biological accidents, successful ones certainly, but ultimately meaningless products of blind natural processes. But if we were created deliberately by the Anunnaki who needed workers, then we have defined purpose. We exist for a reason. We were made with intention. Our capabilities, our intelligence, our social organization, all were designed for specific functions. We're not cosmic accidents. We're intended creations. This realization can be either liberating or disturbing depending on how you approach it. On one hand, it means humans matter. We were important enough that previous Earth rulers dedicated effort to creating us. We have value because we were designed with purpose. Our existence isn't random. On the other hand, it means we were created as servants. Our intended purpose was to work for others. We were made to be subordinate, to serve, to labor for someone else's benefit. Our intelligence and capabilities weren't gifts for our own flourishing. They were tools to make us effective workers. The Sumerian tablets don't hide this. They're explicit that humans were created to bear the yoke, to assume the drudgery of the gods, to work so the Anunnaki could rest. Our design purpose was servitude. That's uncomfortable. It challenges how we think about human dignity, human worth, human destiny. But here's what's interesting. Humans didn't remain servants. Yes, we were created as workers. Yes, our initial purpose was servitude, but we transcended that purpose. We inherited the earth. We developed our own civilization. We created art, music, philosophy, science, all things that go far beyond the utilitarian labor we were supposedly designed for. The tablets document this transformation. Initially, humans are servants doing exactly what we were created to do, maintaining agriculture, digging canals, building infrastructure. But gradually, humans become more than that. We develop culture. We build our own cities. We create our own religions, worshipping the Anunnaki who created us. We start ruling ourselves. And eventually, when the Anunnaki fade through interbreeding and genetic absorption, humans inherit everything. The earth that was once ruled by our creators becomes ours. The civilization they established becomes the foundation for our own civilizations. Their knowledge becomes our inheritance. Their purpose for us becomes superseded by purposes we define for ourselves. This is the actual narrative arc of human history according to Sumerian tablets. We begin as created servants. We transcend servitude to become inheritors. We're given purpose by our creators, but we define new purposes for ourselves. We're made for their benefit, but we flourish for our own sake. If this is true history rather than mythology, it means humanity's greatest achievement isn't that we evolved from nothing to become conscious beings. Our greatest achievement is that we were created as servants but became rulers, that we transcended the purpose we were given and defined our own destiny, that we were made to serve but we chose to be free. The Anunnaki created us with specific intentions. They designed us for specific functions. They gave us capabilities that would make us effective workers. But capabilities, once given, can be used for purposes beyond their intended design. Intelligence meant to follow complex instructions can also compose poetry. Hands meant to dig canals can also paint frescoes. Social cooperation meant to coordinate labor can also create communities of meaning. The Anunnaki gave us these capabilities, intending us to be perfect servants. But in giving us these capabilities, they gave us the potential to become something they perhaps didn't anticipate, something that could not only serve, but also inherit, not only follow, but also lead, not only work, but also create. And when they gradually faded through interbreeding, when they were absorbed into the human population they'd created, what remained wasn't masters and servants. What remained was a hybrid population carrying both heritages, ruling itself, defining its own purposes, building civilizations that exceeded anything the Anunnaki had created when they ruled alone. This is humanity's story according to Sumerian tablets. We're created beings, yes. We have designed purpose, yes, but we're also beings who transcended that design, who exceeded their creator's intentions, who became something more than we were meant to be. If the tablets are right, if this is our actual history, then human dignity doesn't come from being evolution's natural development. It comes from being creation's unexpected triumph. We were made to be servants. We became inheritors. We were designed for labor. We created culture. We were intended as tools. We developed as conscious beings with purposes of our own. The Anunnaki made us, but we made ourselves what we are beyond their intentions. And that's a far more meaningful origin story than random evolution could ever provide. It means every human achievement, every work of art, every scientific discovery, every philosophical insight, every moment of beauty or meaning or transcendence represents humanity exceeding its designed purpose, represents servants who became creators. represents beings who were given capabilities for specific purposes, but who use those capabilities to define purposes of their own. The tablets document this transformation from creation to transcendence, from servitude to inheritance, from beings designed by others to beings defining ourselves. And if we take them seriously, if we read them as history rather than mythology, they tell us something profound about human nature and human potential. We are capable of transcending any purpose given to us. We are capable of inheriting any world we find ourselves in. We are capable of becoming more than we were designed to be. Because that's exactly what we did. When the Anunnaki created us as workers, we eventually became rulers. When they gave us capabilities for servitude, we used those capabilities for freedom. And now, thousands of years after the Anunnaki faded into genetic absorption and mythological memory, we rule Earth as their hybrid descendants. We carry their genetics. We inherit their knowledge. We occupy their world. But we define our own purposes. We create our own meanings. We write our own history. The Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans, according to Sumerian tablets, but humans rule Earth now, not because we overthrew them, not because we defeated them, but because they gradually became us through interbreeding, and we gradually became what we are, through transcending the purposes they designed us for. This is the story the tablets have been trying to tell for 4,000 years. The story of creation and transcendence, of servitude and inheritance, of beings designed with specific purposes who exceeded those purposes to become something their creators might not have anticipated. If it's true, if the tablets are historical documentation, then every human being carries this legacy. We're all descendants of creators and creation, hybrid inheritors of both heritages, beings who were made with purpose, but who defined purposes of our own. And that makes the tablets more than ancient mythology. It makes them a testimony to human potential, to our capacity to transcend limitations, to our ability to inherit what others built and make it our own, to our power to take capabilities designed for servitude and use them for freedom, for creativity, for purposes that go far beyond anything we were supposedly made for. The Anunnaki ruled before humans. Then they created humans. Then they interbred with humans. Then they became absorbed into humans. And now humans rule, carrying forward both heritages, defining our own future, writing our own story. The tablets documented the beginning of this story. They preserved it for thousands of years. They waited patiently for humanity to develop enough to understand what they were actually saying. And now, finally, perhaps we're ready to hear it, to recognize that we might be created beings who transcended our creation, designed servants who became free inheritors, products of intentional creation who nevertheless defined our own destiny. According to Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans and created humans to serve them. But according to human history, humans inherited Earth from the Anunnaki and made it our own. Both testimonies are true, both are preserved, both await anyone willing to read them seriously, to consider them carefully, to ask whether the oldest written words might actually preserve the deepest truths. The night is deep. The tablets rest in their archives. The testimony waits in wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay 4,000 years ago. And somewhere in the space between sleep and waking, between history and mythology, between what we were told and what might actually be true, the Anunnaki wait too. Not as gods, not as aliens, but as our creators, our ancestors, our genetic heritage. Part of us, part of what makes us human, part of the story we're still trying to understand. Good night. And may your dreams carry you back to the beginning, to the time before humans, when Earth was ruled by others who looked at their world and decided it needed workers and created us to fill that need. They gave us more than they intended. They made us capable of more than they anticipated. They created servants who became inheritors, and now we inherit their world, carry their genetics, preserve their memory, and define our own purposes. Created beings who transcended creation. Servants who became free, workers who became rulers, according to the tablets. According to testimony pressed into clay that has waited 4,000 years for someone to finally take it seriously. The Anunnaki ruled Earth before humans. The tablets say so, explicitly, repeatedly, consistently. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's time we stopped dismissing it and started investigating seriously. Maybe the oldest testimony deserves to be heard at last. The clay remembers, the wedges preserve. The truth waits. 4,000 years of patience, 4,000 years of testimony, 4,000 years of waiting for humanity to finally listen. Good night. Sleep well. And when you wake, consider the possibility that everything you thought you knew about human origins might need to be reconsidered, because the tablets are still there, still testifying, still insisting, still preserving the memory of when Earth was ruled by others and humans were created to serve them. The Anunnaki ruled before humans, according to Sumerian tablets. That's what they say. That's what they've always said. Maybe it's time we believe them.